Hi everyone, I'm Daniel. Welcome to Just One Truth. This is video number 2 in the installment of Decoding the Gospel of Thomas. I'm going to pick up on verse number 9. We finished with 8 in the first episode, so when we get underway, but I've got a story to tell first, a story that I just made up now, but it's going to help to unpack a few things as we move along. Imagine it's 1,500 years ago. And there's a man that is in very dire straits. His life is in shambles, but he hears of this man, this master, this sage, this guru that sits high on a mountaintop, way up on a pinnacle that has answers to everything that you want to know in life. He knows the secret to life. And this man, he sets out to find him. The man has no resources. He has no clothing other than what he has on, no extra clothing. He's barefooted. And he starts up the mountain. And it's a very difficult path. As he moves along for the first day, he's stepping on sharp rocks. His feet are bleeding and cut. They're hurt. But despite his physical suffering, nothing is going to stop him because his heart is really hurt. He finds a protected cave kind of the first night to stay overnight. He finds moss and things like that to make a bed, so is somewhat comfortable, and he feels good. He feels really good. The next day, he gets up and he starts again. He has no food. He's getting hungry. He's getting higher up. It's getting cold. He's starting to hit snowfields. This continues on all day long. He's climbing all day, 12, 14, 16 hours. That's all he has to do. He still sees the mountain way up high where he's got to go. He finds another cave and he stays overnight in that, and he feels protected. It's a little warm in there. It's got some vent coming from inside of the earth, and it's warmed it up in there, so it got him warmed up. He feels good again. The next morning he gets up and he starts, but he's right into the snowfield, and it's getting steeper and steeper and steeper, and it's hard. It's been warming up and then freezing at night, so it's like ice. He's having to put finger holds into the ice and kick his toes into the ice to climb, and he's climbing for hours and hours and hours, and he is really taxed. This is hurting him. He is suffering incredibly. But he finally gets to a point where he sees the guy sitting on top who's up there looking across and looking down on everybody. Meditating, the man looks like the epitome of peace. He gets up near him, and at the last little bit, there's just some rock, and it's actually a little bit of an overhang, so he has to climb up, and he's backwards a little bit. And just below the feet of this sage, there's a little ledge around the bottom, about an inch or a few centimeters, just thickness, where he can barely get his fingers on, and he's holding on there, and he looks up at the sage and he tells him his story. He tells him, when I was born, I was abandoned by my parents, and I was given to an orphanage and raised in the orphanage. And while I was there, the headmasters of the place would make me work and work extra hard, and they would beat me with sticks. And all the other kids would laugh at me and call me stupid and call me all kinds of names. After they got done eating at the end of the day, they threw the scraps out the back where I had to dig through with the other animals, the rats and the mice and the wild dogs, and try to get something to eat. And my entire life was that way up until about 14 or 15. And then they kicked me out and told me to go out on my own. But as I went out on life on my own, I couldn't find work that was reliable. I would continue to lose my jobs because I was angry, and I would get mad at whoever was hiring me, whoever was giving me work. They didn't give me enough money. I couldn't buy land. Things that I wanted, I couldn't have. I couldn't have a wife. And I just got in trouble all the time, yelling at people and wanting to get drunk. And I don't know what to do. My life is horrible. And he's still holding on right there, kind of shaking a little bit. And the sage looks down at him and he's thinking, oh my God, this poor man. I'm going to give him the best sage advice that I possibly can. He looks down at the man and makes eye contact with him very intently and says, listen to me. I want you to listen to me. Do you understand? You must do what I say. And the guy's like, yes, please, I will do anything. Just help me, help me. And the master looks at him and says, let go. And the man hanging by his fingertips thought about that for a second and thought, okay, I made it all the way up here. He must know what he's talking about. And he released his grip and he fell. And he fell down past the overhang, and the first place he hit was the snowfield. And he's sliding and sliding and sliding. He had been climbing so long that he was sliding down the snow, the steep snow, for hours, out of control, just sliding and sliding. And he's thinking to himself, I don't get it. Why did he do that? Why didn't he help me out? And he finally slides down into a bowl. So he's safe. He's all right. He gradually decelerates. He's alive, but he's lying on his back. By then it's nighttime. He's looking up into the stars in the sky, getting cold again, and thinking, that was horrible. Why did he tell me to let go? The sage, from his vantage point, is looking down at this man as he's falling away and thinking to himself, I told him to let go. Why did he turn loose? So the story is, what is it about a verse that makes it valuable, that makes it viable? And in this case, there's two words: let go. Let go is what the master meant for him to do to improve his life, to let go of the things that he was hanging on to. He didn't mean turn loose of the cliff. He meant let go of the things that you hang on to. But he didn't say it in a very descriptive way. And why would we do something like that? Why would verse be so short? Why wouldn't it be detailed? You might listen to something like that and think to yourself, let go of what? I'm not hanging on to anything. Life is coming at me. I have nothing to do but to deal with life. When you get on this path, you begin to learn things like, I'm hanging on to things that identify me. I'm allowing them to identify me. That my life experiences are hurtful and I won't let them go. So that is who I become. At some point, as you're making progress along the way, presumably you get to a point where you realize the things that I carry with me, the things that identify me, is what is creating life conditions to repetitively be along those same lines. The reason that my life isn't changing is because what I have up here isn't changing. A verse like let go to a spiritual seeker is incredibly complete. And the reason it is complete is because you haven't defined it into something very specific. People from all over the place have different things that they're carrying with them. Shame, pain, anger, hurt. They've been abused. There's all manner of things. Some people haven't had those things. They just desire stuff so bad that hurts them. When you try to identify everything for everybody, it gets too verbose. You can't describe it all. And somebody that has something very obscure that they're hanging on to might look at that big list and go, oh, mine doesn't fit. I must have to do something else. By simply saying, let go, that's fully encompassing. That covers everything. Some verses are that way. They're that short and they're that complete. They have the capacity to grow with the seeker in that as you continue to make steps along the way, that verse is still just as viable at the end as it was at the beginning. Okay, like I said, that's going to come into play as we go through this. So let's go ahead and get started. The Gospel of Thomas, verse 9. Jesus says, look, a sower went out. He filled his hands with seeds and he scattered them. Some fell on the path, and birds came and pecked them up. Others fell on the rocks and did not take root in the soil, and they did not put forth ears. And others fell among the thorns. They choked the seeds, and worms ate them. And others fell on good soil. It produced good fruit. It yielded 60 per measure and 120 per measure. Okay, this is the only verse I'm going to do the 3-layer thing very quickly so we can see how the nested teaching is inside of layers. The first layer we see is very obvious. A biblical literalist, and I know this from talking to somebody one time, said that this is about agriculture. As far as he was concerned, the Bible told him that God had just created the heavens and the earth in fairly recent times up to this, and this verse was intended to teach the people that in order to maximize yield, to feed God's people in a growing population, that you just had to make sure that your fields were properly tilled, that they were not full of thistles and rocks and things like that. Anybody on the outside looking in would ponder that and go, why wouldn't God just use plain language then? Why embed a teaching about that in such a cryptic manner. Additionally, and this is very glaring, we are told it's a parable. A parable is not supposed to be taken at face value. You're supposed to figure it out. There's a lesson in there. Simply reading it at face value is like taking a fable, something like The Tortoise and the Hare, and not getting the idea that it's about slow and steady wins the race, and telling people, no, it's only a story about a race that happened between a tortoise and a hare. And what we see is that there is absolutely no spiritual lesson if we read it that way. So we don't look at it on the outer surface layer. An interpreted layer, I've got a family member that told me this. All of these things where the seeds landed that were not fertile, where they landed on the path and the birds ate them, where they fell on rocks, where they fell among thorns, that these were very non-fertile places to throw the seed, and that the seed was God's word. God's word was the Bible, and that God spread this everywhere. And the people that were non-fertile were the people that didn't believe, that said, that's, I don't want to live that life. I'm not going to follow that God. And as we continued the conversation, he let me know that that included atheists, Buddhists, Hindu, Taoists, Jewish people, Native Americans, anybody and everywhere in the world that doesn't believe the Christian version of the Bible, and that this parable to him was representative of that, and that the Christians were the fertile soil. At this layer where the Christians do interpretation, somebody else will look at it, and Google this, don't take my word for it. What I found is, depending on which website you go to, which religious denomination, they all have kind of similar but variable interpretations of this. One of them was that your mind contains different areas, that some of them are good, where you want to become a Christian, but there's parts of you that still want to sin, that still don't commit, that are still doing bad things. So you're kind of this back and forth. You're the weekend Christian or the Sunday Christian or something like that. And that God's word was the Bible, and that was represented by the seeds, and that it fell on different parts inside of your own mind. And the fertile parts of you are what grow, and the other parts do not. And some of them explain it away as your commitment or lack thereof, while others will go so far as to say that Satan, that the devil, is still influencing bad parts of you, that you have this internal conflict between good and evil that have to do with supernatural spirits external to you that is creating conflict. That second layer is where we see people interpret it the way they want. When you observe this, what you see is that instead of people understanding what the verse is and growing into the teaching, what they're doing is coming to the table with a preconceived belief already, and they're doing everything they possibly can to look at that verse and explain it until it fits with what their belief is. So they're not growing into the teaching, they're making the teaching fit what they already believe. Interpretations range far and wide, and Christians often don't agree with each other either, which leads an individual to ask, if this was God's word, why wouldn't he have been clear? Why wouldn't he have just told people, you need to fully commit? Why encode it in something about agriculture? There's a reason for that. The stories are meant to be carried by the masses, like I have contended all throughout this, and that internally is the teaching that we are going after. Anyway, okay, let's get to level 3, where we need to be. First off, this verse does not represent anything catastrophic as far as making big steps along the path. It does actually represent the idea of there being fertile places and non-fertile places. That one is very obvious. The difference is, when we turn it inwards, we need to realize that we are the ones that are actually planting the seeds, and that it doesn't come from external supernatural, that it is very natural, and that when we understand that and apply it this way, we've got a handle on it. We can do something about it. We don't have to rely upon the capacity of external forces to help us out. It's really in our hands. The way that I have come to see and understand this is that the way we process our experiences are how we store it. What goes into our garden is not simply the life experience that causes us to feel some way. It's the way that we feel that creates that. You might see something and think, I hate that, and you store it that way. You might love what it is, and you store it that way. We are actually planting the seeds and creating the environment for them to be fertile or not fertile based on how we perceive them and based on how we continue to hold them. We plant our own seeds. In Buddhism, we know that the idea is to achieve nirvana. In the teachings of Jesus, who taught the same thing in his culture, it's the kingdom of heaven within. So that's our goal. We're moving towards that. Buddha emphasized that that was the cessation of all suffering. Jesus emphasized it's becoming the embodiment of love. Every verse that we interpret and every way that we interpret it has that end goal in mind, the kingdom of heaven within, the peace, the let go of things, the I'm okay with life. I'm not all wrapped up in things. I'm happy all the time. But this verse kind of serves as a warning. It lets you know that you are definitely a mixed bag at some point in time in life. Unless you were raised in a culture where you were brought up as a Buddhist or as a very inward spiritual looking person, typically that's not the case. Typically people are raised in normal cultures, worshiping gods, having a lot of problems in life. And that when you go to seek answers, when you go to seek a way out of that, that you have all of your past with you, all of the parts of you that are hurt, that are angry, that want to go party, that want to fall off the wagon, that want to go eat a bunch of donuts. We're going to modernize this just a little bit. Doing things that are really actually not physically or spiritually healthy for you are things that we have practiced. And even though you say, I'm going to quit all of that stuff, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to commit myself to this new way of life and make all of those changes, that I'm going to forgive the people that have hurt me, that have caused me to hate, that have caused me to have shame, that I'm going to find ways of easing my pain. You're going to run into some problems, especially early on. It takes a little while before you change old habits, and that's because your brain's been wired. You have neural pathways in place that take you off course while you're trying to blend with that something that brings you on course. But for people who have committed themselves to a very internal seeking path, it's very important to realize that it's your brain, it's your thinking, it's your past, it's your experiences that you bring with you that is the issue. That it isn't Satan or God or angels. You got to take care of it. And knowing that, realizing that, coming to terms with that is very empowering. It puts the capacity to change in you instead of you wanting to make the change, waiting for it to happen, and then blubbering like I have at times in my life, thinking, I'm a failure. It's not working. What do I do? It's important to know the actual mechanics of what's happening in order for you to accurately deal with it. Okay, let's move on to the next verse. Verse 10, Jesus says, I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I am guarding it until it blazes. This one is very easy. Jesus, Christ consciousness. That part of us that is on the path, that part of us that wants to make changes, have cast fire upon the world. The world is me, my experience, my life, my perceptions of all that exists. That is the world. When I cast fire upon the world as the Christ consciousness, I am planting the seed in myself, like the last verse. This one shores up the last verses, that I want to make this change. However, I know, like the last verse covered, there's going to be struggles. It's not going to be easy. I'm going to fall back into old patterns, old habits. It is incredibly important if you want to get to where you want to be, if you want to achieve this state of being, that you have to guard it. If you've started a fire before, you know that just lighting the match and getting the little bit going, it'll burn up and it'll go out real quickly. You have to keep guarding it. You can't let the rain put it out or the wind put it out. You have to keep adding little bits and building it gradually, bit by bit, until it's a big blazing fire. And that is indicative of the path that we have to take and how it's going to work. You don't just snap your fingers and you're there. It takes work. It's going to take effort. You cast fire upon the world and guard it until it blazes. You decide to make changes and you keep focusing on it until habitually you're now the embodiment of what it is you're trying to achieve. Okay, moving on now to verse number 11. Jesus says, "This heaven will pass away, and the heaven above it will pass away. And the dead are not alive, and the living will not die. In the days when you consumed what was dead, you made it alive. When you are in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two. But when you become two, what will you do?" Now, as obscure as this group sounds, they're actually fairly easy. We're just going to redefine them a little bit, the words, to use something that we're more familiar with, and they'll come right online. We're going to start with number 1. This heaven will pass away, and the heaven above it will pass away. In Christianity, heaven is thought to be a place of eternal life after death on earth, a final place to exist in eternity with God. Obviously, as Jesus is teaching this and he's referencing a number of different heavens, we will have to look at it in a different way. And that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what we need to do with Jesus. Jesus continually teaches that the kingdom of heaven is within, and I've been hammering on this idea that is a mental state of being, of happiness, of peace, of joy, of love. In that short story that I made up in the beginning where the man wanted to climb the mountain, that's a typical kind of a story which illustrates this path. The master is at a high place, and you need to seek that place, and it's going to be hard work. And the story begins with the person deciding, I have to make changes. And they begin going through the hardships required to get to there. And along the way, they achieve goals. In our story, after he started off on his path, remember, his feet were bleeding and he was in pain and he was hurting and suffering physically, but he was still moving along. And he finds a cave to stay in for the first night, makes himself a bed so he can get comfort. And as a result, he rested and felt great. But the next day, the same thing happened. A lot of hard work, a lot of pain, a lot of turmoil, and then success again. This illustrates this idea that you have to make steps. Remember Jacob's ladder in the Bible? The dream where he sees a ladder going up into heaven. And there's multiple steps it takes to get there. It's not a one-shot deal. You're looking to get to an elevated place. Probably the best illustration I can think of as an example is that times in my life, I was holding on to the fear of letting anybody know that I had been molested, and that holding on to that and guarding that created incredible turmoil in me. And this was turmoil that I experienced at a very deep level very frequently, but I didn't recognize why it was there. But my fear of letting that out was so considerable and so great that I couldn't do it. When I finally got to a point where I realized, oh, you know what? I do have to get that out. I can't trap it inside. Trapping it inside is very hurtful to me, and it's an indicator of being weak. Holding on to that stuff is not a measure of strength. A measure of strength is getting it out. And upon getting it out, upon talking it out with somebody and getting it off my chest, I felt so elated that would be reference to the first step of heaven. There were several weeks where I felt like my feet didn't touch the ground. Wave to people, strangers, just, oh, you feel so good, you're waving, and they're waving back. You're like, wow, how does this happen? This is wonderful. But after a week or two, you feel normal again. Even though you've gotten that off your chest, the elation doesn't continue to feel that way. You've made one step. There was more for me to do. I had steps to go along the way. So even though I had come to terms with one really incredibly significant fear that I had inside of me, I still had a lot of fears. I still had a childhood of abuse, of my brother hanging himself, and all of the things that I carried with me that created in me, in my life, a lot of layers of anger and hatred and shame that I had to resolve. The multiple steps of heaven are the multiple steps that you must go through to get to the top of the mountain, to get to that high point where you are up above it all, looking down on everything. Buddha has a verse in the Dhammapada. Let me read that one real quick. This one is the New Translation by Gil Fronsdal, and it is in chapter 2, and the verse is, "Driving away negligence with vigilance, ascending the tower of insight and free of sorrow. A sage observes the sorrowing masses, as someone standing on a mountain observes fools on the ground below." Common stories and spiritual teachings are to get through layers, take steps to get to an elevated place. So when Jesus is saying this heaven will pass away and the next one will pass away, that's what the reference is. You don't get there in one shot in an act of acceptance. You got to go through the layers. Remember even the story of Moses in the 10 Commandments. He had to go up to the mountain and he sees the wise man. He talks to God. Same reference, different culture. After he comes down from his glorious trip, after making some success, goes back into civilization, things happen and he gets mad, destroys everything, and has to go do it again. Again, we're seeing reference of repetitive steps or embedded reference to this idea that getting to the top is going to take repeated work. And it really harkens back to the last verse, and we can see a pattern going along here. As you begin this path, it's not going to be easy, and you're going to have steps to take. And the stories reference physical locations, a heaven that's up in the clouds or the top of a mountain. Basically, what we're looking to do is to get to that higher state of being where we're above it all. Okay, that covers our multiple stages of heaven, and let's move on to the next line. "And the dead are not alive, and the living will not die." Okay, the first thing we have to do is come up with a couple of different terms for dead and alive. We know that these do not literally mean dead or alive. We can look at it and see that the dead are not alive. That is true. And the living will not die. Completely untrue. So these words mean something different. Let's define them in a way that make more sense to us, and then we can proceed easier. So in this case, when we're talking about dead or alive, we're talking about spiritual awareness. And let's look at some terms here. Dead or alive is how Jesus put it. You could also say blind or can see, or asleep or awake. I like to use looking outward or looking inward. There's also not self-aware or self-aware. Basically, what that comes down to is this. As we grow and as we develop, we're generally not aware of the fact that our brain works the way it does and that our thoughts and perceptions work the way that they do. We simply live life and experience life based on what we see around us. Now, that's not completely 100%. There's a lot of times we're making choices to go do things, to go play, to have fun, to go to work, to do things that we enjoy, recreation, all manner of things. We will make choices to do that. But by and large, when things are happening around us that we don't like, getting caught in traffic and being caught up in it, having news on and being angry at one side or another, just as examples. Basically, anything that when you look and you observe, you are reacting to it. And you're reacting to it based on what you have wired inside of you. You could have been raised in a completely different environment and you would react differently to it. Being unaware or being dead or blind means you don't know that. You don't see that. You justify your actions and your reactions to what is going on around you because of what is happening outside of you. So you are responding based on who and what you are to external stimuli. To phrase that in a different way, instead of you having conscious control over your emotional reaction to what is happening in the environment, what is happening in the environment is actually in control of your mental reactions. You are a product of your environment as opposed to making your environment a product of what you consciously choose. But in our reaction to the environment, we are adding to whatever is there, whether we're aware of that or not. And that is where the phraseology being blind or being able to see comes from. But in this case, we're using the verbiage being dead or being alive to represent the same thing. When you become aware of that, you can step back from it and say, oh, I don't want to get caught up in that. I don't want to go fight that battle. It doesn't do me or my family or anybody any good for me to get wrapped up in this or that, or to angrily yell or to do other things. And those are other issues when you are reacting and responding to things that you have inside of you. When somebody around you does something and you get mad and you scream and you yell, and this is a behavior that is a repetitive behavior, and you can sit there and justify that all day long and say, they did this and they did that, and that's why I'm reacting the way that I did, when in all reality, you don't have to react that way. You are reacting and responding based on how you've been programmed. You're dead. You're blind. You're asleep. You're looking outward. You're not self-aware. All of those terms apply. Once you realize, oh, my life is unfolding for me because of the way that I perceive it, because of the way that I hold on to things, and because I don't have an awareness of that. Things can happen around you and you can step back and say, I'm not going to get caught up in that. I'm not going to jump in on that side. I'm not going to let my brains get wrapped around that issue over there. I'm not going to scream and yell. I'm going to step back and manage it differently. Once you've made that turn, you're awake, or you're coming awake. Once you have developed the capacity to look inward upon yourself and realize that you are adding to the environment consciously or unconsciously, and that you want to become a conscious contributor and add to it in a way that is more conducive to love, peace, and joy, then you're alive. Okay, let's look at the verse again and see how that stacks up. So if we were to rephrase the first line, and the dead are not alive, we could say, and the blind cannot see. You are not aware of the fact that life is unfolding that way, that you are a product of what's happening. You are said to be dead to what is happening. In the next line, and the living will not die. Once you realize, once you've turned inward and you have this epiphany and go, oh my gosh, I am experiencing life based on what is happening outside of me because of my lack of awareness of that. And once you realize that, then you have gone from blind to being able to see, or from being dead, and now you are alive. But once you've made that turn, you don't go back. You don't go from a point of being aware to a point of being unaware. We are now said to be living, but we have elevated to a place of understanding that we won't lose, so we will not die. Okay, next line. In the days when you consumed what was dead, you made it alive. What is dead is not only that non-awareness that we just talked about, but it's also anything that flies in the face of your goal. The goal is the kingdom of heaven within, love, peace, and joy. When you live life with anything other than that as the mainstay, as the primary means for your existence, then you are said to be eating what is dead. This is metaphorically. Spiritual consumption, again, is taking things in. It is feeding yourself what you see in life, your experiences, and the emotional state that goes with it. When you consume things that are not in accordance with the kingdom of heaven within, and you don't know that, then you live that out. You have taken what is dead and made it alive through you. All right. Next line. When you are in the light, what will you do? Light, dark. Aware, not aware. Being blind, or now you can see. These are all metaphors for the same things. When you are in the light, what will you do? Now that you are aware of this, once you have been given the knowledge that up here is what makes your life happen, the infamous as within, so without, what will you do? Pretty simple on this one. All right, next line. On the day when you were one, you became two. We've seen this one quite a bit before. We start out in life as one. And by that, I mean we are consciously and subconsciously of the same mind. We haven't been programmed. We haven't been taught to judge, to have prejudices, to have likes and dislikes, to have emotional distress over things that we don't like. So we are one. Jesus will tell us to enter the kingdom of heaven within as a child. A child has not made that split between being one conscious entity and having different parts of their subconscious that do not coincide with their conscious. That's something we can detect when we live life and we become angry, we become hurt, we have emotional stress. It's because of conflicts in our mind of things that are wired in. They reside there in an electrochemical manner. The memories and the emotional states are there. But the lesson here is, what do you do now that you realize you have become two? When we don't want to be two, we want to be one. We want to be of a single mind. And that's it with this line. He's just asking, being aware of it. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? All right, now the last line. But when you become two, what will you do? This just goes with the last sentence. Pretty self-explanatory. Now that you know you have gone from being a single mind when you were an infant and then grew into two separate minds, what will you do? Verse 11 and the four sentences that are in there don't tell what to do. In a nutshell, what they are saying is that this path that you're taking is going to be a multi-step path. But that if you are not awake and realize where your life comes from inside of you, that you won't even make the path. That you are the one who has consumed, by consuming what was dead, you are just living your life blind, taking whatever comes and responding to what happens in the world. And that you have become two. Now what are you going to do about it? So that wraps those up. Let's move on to verse number 12. The disciples said to Jesus, "We know that you will depart from us. Who then will rule over us?" Jesus said to them, "No matter where you came from, you should go to James the just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being." Okay, for me, this one falls into the category of not very clear. It doesn't seem to be a personal spiritual growth teaching. In fact, we have a number of principal players here. The disciples themselves are talking to Jesus and indicating that they know he's going to depart from them, who then will rule over them. Jesus is, in my world, not a supernatural being, Son of God, where you just worship him and you gain favor. That's that very shallow religious layer. So if I look at this and look at it as simply a teaching that we're supposed to use, what I see is the idea that a Christ consciousness, a Buddha nature, that this idea that there is a teaching and something that you are supposed to pursue, if that departs from you. And how would that do that? The only way I can think of that would depart from you is when you are falling back into old habits, when you're on this path and you're trying to make changes, but it doesn't work all the time. You're falling back into old habits. It takes a while to make some changes. That would be the departure of Christ. And in order to get that back, you go to James the Just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being. Heaven and earth, to me, heaven is that happy, that good place, that kingdom of heaven within. Earth would be the place that we live when we are metaphorically said to be blind, or, as in the previous verses, dead. Heaven and earth, heaven and hell, upper, lower. It represents the high place and the low place. The bottom of the mountain, the top of the mountain. The bottom of the ladder, the top of the ladder. Yeah, this is one of those you look at and go, I don't really see an inner spiritual teaching in this one. I'm going to ask again that please go ahead and feel free to leave comments or your ideas down below along those lines. There's a lot of verses in here. The source of them is uncertain. Not everything is going to be an incredibly significant spiritual learning verse. This, to me, would be basically saying that if you're struggling and it's not working out for you, just stick with just. Even then, what is just? Does that word exist in their culture? What was lost in the translation, if anything? This one doesn't make as good a sense to me as the previous ones. And again, I don't believe that all of the verses do. Some of them are rules for the community or other hints and tricks, I suppose, to stay along the path. Some of them you look at and go, okay, that is something I need to do. Other ones you look at and go, I'm not really sure if that's an action I can take or if that's just something that's happening in the community. Many of the ones that we find along the way are like some of the ones that we've had so far. It's kind of letting you know that it's a multi-step approach and that it's going to be difficult and you're going to fall back into old habits. So be prepared for that. They're really kind of guideposts that are letting you know not only how to make the journey, but that there are certain things you can expect as stumbling stones along the way. We'll look at them, and again, I won't discard them. I'll set them off to the side and ask you for input. Yeah, go ahead and tell me what you think. Put it below. All right, on to verse 13. Jesus said to his disciples, "Compare me and tell me whom I am like." Simon Peter said to him, "You are like a just messenger." Matthew said to him, "You are like an especially wise philosopher." Thomas said to him, "Teacher, my mouth will not bear at all to say whom you are like." Jesus said, "I am not your teacher, for you have drunk and have become intoxicated at the bubbling spring that I have measured out." And he took him and withdrew, and he said 3 words to him. But when Thomas came back to his companions, they asked him, "What did Jesus say to you?" And Thomas said to them, "If I tell you one of the words he said to me, you will pick up stones and throw them at me, and fire will come out of the stones and burn you up." That one is very strange. I don't have a good handle on this one. Help. Let's take a look at a couple of things, though, and see what we can get out of it. And to be completely honest, there is a significant category of verses in the Gospel of Thomas that don't make sense like this, that are very difficult. I've discussed them with a lot of people for a long time, and nobody's ever come up with anything that makes you go, oh, that's it. I mean, people have a lot of ideas, and you think, well, that could be. Some stuff you come up with really stands out as, oh yeah, that is a spiritual path. That's a teaching. Other times you read it and go, boy, this is bizarre. And for me, as I go through it, there are going to be limitations to what I come up with because of my absolute refusal to step into the world of supernatural as an explanation. So in this case, it doesn't really appear to be a personal spiritual teaching, a growth type teaching. In fact, it involves other people. We've got Peter and Matthew and Thomas, all 3 in here with Jesus, and they're having a dialogue. So that one looks a little bit different from the others right there. And of course, they're telling him a just messenger, an especially wise philosopher. Those are nice things to say, but they're not very strong complimentary verbiage that really makes Jesus stand out as anything more special than anybody else that isn't a wise philosopher. Okay, and we remember Thomas means twin. And remember, the name was Didymos Judas Thomas. Both Didymos and Thomas mean twin. So Judas is presumably the individual's real name. So in this case, it looks like they could be saying spiritual twin, perhaps. Anyway, then Jesus says, I'm not your teacher. And that makes sense. When you're on a path and you're looking for people that are going to be your guides, you have people that you will seek out because presumably they have achieved that state that you're looking to achieve as well. And you're looking for answers. So you talk to them and they give you directions. They will point a way for you to go, but it's up to you to get there. So at that point in time, you have accumulated the next piece of academic knowledge, but now you must go and make it experiential. So at that point in time, you are your own teacher. Hinduism actually has a term for that called upaguru. And what that means is your life, the way you experience life, the way that you look at life, the way you evaluate life is your guru, that's your teacher. So it could be that he's suggesting something like that. I don't know. For you have drunk and you have become intoxicated at the bubbling spring that I have measured out. Ultimately, that makes sense if you were saying that somebody drank what you gave spiritually. Could be. The 3 words, okay, now it gets really bizarre. He told him 3 words, and when Thomas came back and talked to Matthew and Simon Peter, and they asked him, what did Jesus say to you? And he tells them that if I tell you what they are, you'll pick up stones and throw them at me, but the stones will spit out fire and burn you, which is like, whoa, well, it sounds like magic, doesn't it? I don't know what that is. And a lot of people have told me that they think it means something like, don't tell anyone, or keep this secret. My own guess would be something like, it's about you. But it interprets here as, if I tell you one of the words he said to me. Does that mean any one of the words or only one of the words? Elsewhere in the teachings are some references to stones, but not very significantly. It has more to do with, even if you lift a stone, you will find the kingdom of God in the teaching that's telling you that the kingdom of God is here. It's everywhere. It is here now. We just don't see it. The stone may be something that means, I don't know, attachment to the earth. Jacob's ladder, remember that story? He used a stone as his pillow. I don't know why that would be important to tell in the story unless there was something there that was important for us to know. And also the number 3. There were 3 stones, so there could be something else in here that is being overlooked. The number 3 shows up very commonly in Hebrew mysticism and religion. I think people who are more knowledgeable about the Kabbalah or other early Jewish works, where we get the understanding that 40 is code for until the time of completion or until the time of enlightenment, where we learn what those codes are. If that's your strong suit, boy, I'd love to hear about it. Leave your comments below. Help me out. Let's figure out the mystery of these things. So this is one of those. I'm going to set it off to the side and go, wow, I don't get this one. It doesn't quite fit. Okay, next in line is number 14, but we're going to skip that. If you watched episode number 1, you'll know that when we got to verse number 6, there were questions asked by the disciples, and we had to jump here. This is where the answers to those were. So we've already covered these ones right here. Next up then is verse number 15. Jesus says, when you see one who was not born of woman, fall on your face and worship him. That one is your father. Okay, this one gets back into the realm of making sense. We've got our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. They didn't call them conscious and subconscious. They had a variety of different terms for them: carnal mind, soul, spirit, father, mother, male, female. That is kind of an Asian and Far Eastern sort of teaching. We also, in the beginning of Genesis, see Adam, the male, starting out life, and then the female emerging from him later. That would be a parallel to the way a human works. You start out as an consciousness, and as you grow and as you emerge, there's a part of you that grows separately. And they're referencing that here as female, male and female portions. So if we use that description, which has precedence elsewhere, when you see something born of woman, woman in this case is meant to be your subconscious mind. And if we look at Adam and Eve, let's just grab that for a second. Most people know that story. Adam was made and lived in the Garden of Eden, but the female emerged from him, from his side, later on, and went out and created or was influenced in such a way that sin happened and the Garden of Eden was lost. I'm going to do this one later. I'm going to do Genesis at another time, but I'm just trying to kind of paint a picture here of what I believe is going on in this verse. That the woman does not mean female. The woman means any person's subconscious, male or female. That your consciousness is referred to as the male, and your subconscious is referred to as the female. Your subconscious is the one that is the programming, the stuff that is on autopilot, the conditioning, the parts of you that are dead. When that is producing something, you don't worship that. It is producing your anger, your shame, your hatred, your judgment, all of those things. So the manifested results in your life that are coming from your subconscious or your woman portion, your female portion, the subconscious mind, what they saw as the soul. We need to be accustomed to the terms that they used. It's how they encoded things. They didn't have the scientific or the medical knowledge and terminology that we have to work with. So when we have things that we are producing, which is screaming and yelling again, doing things like that, whatever issues that we have that are the problems that we have in life, you don't worship that. What you worship is what your conscious mind, here referred to as the father or male, those are when you are making choices about, I'm not going to do this. Here is what I have to do instead. I'm not going to continue my anger. I'm going to take other courses of action. That those choices are coming from your conscious mind. That's what you want. You don't want to worship what comes from your subconscious mind. Once your conscious mind actually has taken full control and has rectified what is in your subconscious mind, only good acts out. But that's a part of this path that's been described, the steps, and we're moving along. So to get to the kingdom of heaven, we have to make these steps. And anybody who is realizing this male-female thing and is familiar with the Gospel of Thomas and knows what the last couple of verses are, feel free to jump ahead and go look at that. That's the only way that can be explained. You know, the very idea that Jesus would have to take Mary off and teach her how to be male so that she can enter heaven like the rest of the males. There's nothing more contentious in the Gospel of Thomas than that. You can't read that at face value. No, you have to assign different values to what they're talking about. There's something nested in there. Let's go ahead and move on right now to the next verse. Verse number 16. Jesus says, "Perhaps people think that I have come to cast peace upon the earth. But they do not know that I have come to cast dissension upon the earth, fire, sword, war. For there will be 5 in one house, and there will be 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. Father against son, and son against father, and they will stand as solitary ones." This is one where I believe some of it is incredibly clear and some of it is still a little bit up in the air. First of all, we're looking at two ways of viewing this, looking at it outward from a religious perspective or looking at it inward from a spiritual seeker's perspective. So in the first line, people think that I have come to cast peace upon the earth. Those are the people that think he came here as the Savior that's come to straighten everything out. Line number 2, he says, they do not know that I have come to cast dissension upon the earth, fire, sword, and war. The earth is yourself, your own existence, who and what you are and how you view life. Peace upon the earth, from a Christian perspective, would be the planet. Peace upon the earth in a spiritual seeking perspective would be that kingdom of heaven within, the peace that's in here, the peace that you can get through going through the rest of this process. So he's come to cast dissension upon the earth, fire, sword, and war. Well, that sounds like he's come here to justify killing people. That kind of flies in the face of everything he teaches. So I'm just going to say that's ridiculous. However, fire, sword, and war, if you're trying to clean the place out, yeah, you go after what you're carrying and you attack it. The ideas that you have about hating, about wanting, about desiring, about judgment, all of those things, that is what he has come to cast upon the world. It's your world, Jesus, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, same thing. I know I'm hammering that all the time. I apologize. I just want to get the point across that this is about yourself. And wiping out what you carry that is not good is exactly what you want to do. This is where it gets a little goofy. The next line, for there will be 5 in one house, and there will be 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. I don't know what those 5 things are. The way it's worded there, it almost seems to me like there are 5 qualities, and that these qualities battle each other. Desires and different things that you have, that you maintain, that you possess inside of you, can be in conflict. And that the Father will be against the Son and the Son against the Father. This is a case where we're going to look at Father and Son in the same ways. We're going to look at male, female, conscious, subconscious, carnal mind, soul. The Father is the one that is the conscious mind. That's in charge, tells the Son what to do. The Son responds and does what the Father says until a certain point when the Son begins to disobey. Same as when the conscious mind tells the subconscious what to do, but you've gone off and you've had a bunch of experiences that make it so that you, when you're not paying attention, the subconscious is in charge. The Son is now against the Father. This is you at conflict with yourself. The Father and the Son, the conscious and the subconscious not being the same. The 2 and 3, I'm not sure what those are. The Father and the Son, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And they will stand as a solitary one. That just harkens back to all of Jesus's teachings about being one, making the 2 into 1. And making the 2 into 1 is accomplished where when we're not paying attention, we're still doing everything that we want to, and we're still being good, kind, and loving. That's that combination of things. So in a nutshell, what this verse is saying is that, no, I'm not that person that people are saying I am, this returning Savior that's come back to kick butt and take names. I am the consciousness that turns inward and does battle up in here to wipe that out and to get to a point where you find these qualities, these 5 qualities, combine them, and you become one again. It's that simple. We see a lot of repetitive teaching with Jesus and with this spiritual teaching that appear to be the same lessons over and over again, but taught with different verbiage. They're said in different ways for different people. And that's very clever. That really shows that there's a lot of internal support within this teaching to shore up other parts of the teaching. Okay, moving on to the next verse, 17. Jesus says, I will give you what no eye has seen and what no ear has heard, and what no hand has touched, and what has not occurred to the human mind. This is one where it just sounds very simply, not like a spiritual teaching verse, but that Jesus is telling whoever this is that whatever else you hear out there isn't right, that what I'm teaching you hasn't occurred to anybody else. And I think that comes about, whatever people understand comes about through an interpretation. So I think that you either interpret this at a deep level and you get something different, or you go to a shallower layer and follow the masses. But what he's saying here is that what I'm giving you hasn't occurred to anyone else. Moving on to verse number 18. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Have you already discovered the beginning that you are now asking about the end? For where the beginning is, there the end will be too. Blessed is he who will stand at the beginning, and he will know the end, and he will not taste death." Okay, yay, will not taste death. Sounds like another promise of eternal life. Who doesn't want that? Actually, I know people that don't. So what could this mean? The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." They're asking him, how are we going to die? At least that's what we would be led to believe. And then Jesus replies and asks them if they've already discovered the beginning that you are now asking about the end. I don't think that has any relevance. The next line does. For where the beginning is, there the end will be too. This should look pretty obvious to people by now that are following along, that this is more of being that person before you were developed, before you became your locally and regionally programmed entity that lives life based on where you came from. Again, I will use the example that you could grab anybody anywhere in the world, brand new human, just freshly born, take them home and raise them, and they're going to become one thing. You could take that exact same individual, move them around the world, raise them in a completely different family, in a completely different environment, and they will become a completely different person with different beliefs. And that's the way we work as humans. And left unchecked, we simply become products of a different region, of a different place, of a different belief. Now, that often sets us up to live in environments and conditions where we go to war against another people that we don't like, or that we judge, or maybe not even that. We just don't like other people because of a different race or a different belief. So in that last line, blessed is he who will stand at the beginning, and he will know the end, and he will not taste death. If you mentally realize this and you stand at the beginning and you say, whoa, I'm going to let go of all of those preconceived beliefs because I recognize that that's just what I was given by a mass of people who were given the same thing, who were given, the layers go on. When you realize that you're a product of that you're a part of that, and you step out of it and you go back to the beginning, you go back to yourself before you have those judgments, then you will not taste death. And death is a spiritual death. It's a mental death. It's a life death. It's not about being dead as a human being and decaying in the ground. That's the fate for all of us. This is a death during life where you live either in charge of yourself, or what you are and what you hold up here is in charge of you. And that's a strange one, because up here is always in charge. It's whether or not you look at it, whether or not you see it, and whether or not you recognize the original source of those beliefs. And that's it. How to get to the kingdom of heaven within is not a difficult path to describe. It's a difficult path to travel. It's a difficult personal path that somebody has to go on, and that is where it becomes difficult. And that's where people don't want to pass it along, and you embed it in something that is very appealing and very attractive, and it tends to be supernatural, and at least that's what we have now. These old religions from Iron Age and before, they still require a belief in the supernatural. Anyway, okay, this video has gone into an hour now. Great. I think as we go along, I can get faster and faster with these because we're kind of seeing the process. And yeah, that's it for this one. Leave comments below. Hope you enjoyed it. There is only one truth in everything, and as we continue to look at it like this and see what is nested inside of it, we're going to see the same lessons nested in everything. There is just one truth, and we're getting to it.